Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. My name, as always, is Christopher Shepard. Thank you, guys, for tuning in. Today's show is a very special one. Happy Wednesday. First of all, guys, we made it the middle of the week. This show is special to commemorate that occasion. Every single segment will be dedicated to the betting odds of a specific NFL award. Whether it be MVP to Offensive and Defensive Rookie of the Year, we will be dissecting each and every one of the betting odds and the betting favorites, respectively, for these specific awards. Should be a good one. But before we get into any of those details, let's jump right into the start of the show with saying, please consider liking and following and subscribing to the show and the network. It is a huge support to all those involved, and if you do feel so inclined, we do receive a ton of tips and donations as well, so please consider leaving them in the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters and ultimately the network as a whole. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about anything pertaining to the show, you can also leave them there and they will be addressed at the beginning of the next episode. Without further ado, let's jump right into what should be a fantastically fascinating show about all of these NFL awards, starting off with the most prestigious of all, perhaps the most prestigious in all of sports, the NFL MVP award. And this top five is definitely much more varied than we've seen in the past because we've always seen at least one heavy favorite emerge a little bit early on, but this one definitely feels very balanced. Some of these guys you may not have expected to even be in the top five. Some of these guys coming off injury, some of these guys still young, haven't really had the opportunity to have their say in the MVP voting. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. We're going to stick with this graphic right here, and we'll count down the top five. Starting off with a guy who has a new head coach and shockingly could be a very sneaky dark horse. A lot of people might not be expecting much out of him. But this year could be different because he has a new head coach, new philosophies, and it's almost like a clean slate for him. And we begin with, at number 5, Mr. Justin Herbert. A lot of people might be skeptical as to why he's on this list, seeing as to how he does not have one of the more talented wide receiver rooms in the league. In fact, he perhaps has the worst wide receiver room out of any of these guys in the top 5. But I think the reason why he's on this list is because of that new coach, like we said, in Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh, I feel like, is going to simplify the offense, not going to make it too complex, make sure that Justin Herbert feels comfortable, and most importantly, try and bring out the best traits in him. Because he knows that Justin Herbert has one of the best arms in the NFL. He knows Justin Herbert can throw for a lot of yards, and he knows that ultimately Justin Herbert doesn't necessarily care about who he has as a receiver. He's had a mix of different guys. He's had Keenan Allen, he's had Mike Williams in the past. But this year, I feel like he's going to fully prove why he's one of the NFL's elite quarterbacks. I kind of feel like this is justified a little bit. At plus 1,400, he's kind of a longer odd than one would like in a top 5 QB in MVP standings. But I think he's very appealing, mainly because of Jim Harbaugh's simplification. In terms of Brandon Staley's offense, it definitely felt very forced. It not only felt like they wanted to exploit Justin Herbert's one true strength and not make sure that he's developing in different ways, making sure that, he's not just looking for the vertical deep shot. He's mainly looking for receivers over the middle and short to intermediate routes, and I think that's what Jim Harbaugh is going to do. And it might not be the most appealing wide receiver room to throw to, but he certainly has some guys that he relies upon, like Joshua Palmer. A lot of people can emerge like Vlad McConkey, their exciting young draft pick. And so, overall, while it's definitely not the most intriguing option as a long shot, I think you could take a flyer on him should he, in the first couple of games, prove that he's really learning the complexities of a Jim Harbaugh offense while also caring more about the nuances of his passing game. Coming in at number 4, though, is a guy who just won MVP, but I don't really like this year, in Lamar Jackson. I think that the problem with Lamar is not just, the frequent injuries. It's not just, the lack of a true deep passing game. It's more about how I feel the Ravens' offense is going to evolve. They felt like Derrick Henry was a guy who could be one of those workhorse running backs who could really ground and pound instead of, running back by committee approach that the Ravens usually employed. And so adding him certainly adds a different depth to this offense that the Ravens haven't necessarily had. It adds a piece to consider in terms of how you want to attack opposing defenses. Yes, I feel like Lamar is always going to have that dual threat ability. He's always going to have the designed RPOs. He's always going to have the ability to have more touchdowns than other certain QBs because of his rushing ability. But this year definitely feels a little bit different. And while he certainly has one of the best wide receiver rooms he's ever had in his illustrious career, I feel like the Ravens want to switch to something that kind of alleviates the burden on Lamar Jackson. When we talk about Lamar Jackson, we talk about all the pressures heaped on him to actually throw the football downfield. But now that he actually has a receiving core, they want to make sure that it's not just trying to get Lamar to pass. They want to keep that variation and verbiage to their offense. And adding Derrick Henry certainly helps in that regard because he's definitely more of a smash-mouth traditional running back. As someone who's kind of aging into a stage where he can't necessarily rely on, just strength and agility, he's going to rely more on ground and pound, smash you in the mouth football. And that adds a physicality and grittiness to the Ravens offense they haven't really had. Thus, kind of focusing more on exploiting certain things that Lamar Jackson sees. And that's why I feel like Lamar Jackson's candidacy at plus 1,200 might be a little bit in jeopardy. I still think he's a viable candidate, as always. He's already won 2 MVPs. But right now, this current stage, these top 3 guys are a lot more intriguing. Let's move on to number 3, because this guy certainly was one of the most fascinating quarterbacks last year in his rookie season, and now a heavily coveted MVP favorite in C.J. Stroud. We can say all we want about this man, he's definitely deserved it. One of the best rookie seasons in recent memory by any position player in the history of the NFL. Most passing yards by a rookie, most passing yards in a single game by a rookie. And his star, I believe, will continue to ascend. And C.J. Stroud is definitely someone who I feel is like a strike while the iron is hot kind of player. And what I mean by that is, while the Texans have this freshness about them, this new look to them, this revitalization to them, where they're in the period of his career where he's still in his rookie-friendly contract and they could add more pieces. They've added more pieces to their offense, as we've seen with Stephon Diggs and Joe Mixon. They added more pieces defensively as well. And I really like, while the iron is hot, while C.J. Stroud has all these weapons available to him, and while he feels comfortable with these weapons in this setting, I think this is where his MVP candidacy is going to be at its finest. This is where he's in the period of his career that feels like he could really start garnering more award consideration. Because right now the Texans are on the precipice of being a true contender in this league. And C.J. Stroud is the face of that. So if he continues to develop as a passer, and not only develop as a passer, but incorporate different parts that the Texans acquire for him in this very team-friendly period, then C.J. Stroud will have one of the more appealing cases to be an MVP candidate. Plus 1,000 this year, I would definitely take those odds. I feel like this is finally the year that someone who's young and fresh in the league can really challenge the big boys. This duopoly at the top definitely are very strong, but they have their kind of concerns and questions surrounding them. C.J. Stroud right now definitely feels like someone who you don't have to search for answers on either. And so at number 3, I think there's a lot of value. But these top 2 guys definitely are 2 of the best competitors in this league. Starting off at number 2, maybe a guy who shouldn't be this high. in all reality because of his injury woes. But when he is on the field and throwing the football, he is definitely one of the best quarterbacks in the AFC and in the entire NFL, and that is Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow at plus 900 definitely feels like a very heavy overvaluation considering how he came out of that very weird wrist injury. And this year definitely feels like one of those years for the Bengals where if they don't figure it out in a hurry, a lot of players' careers will be in jeopardy, especially like his receiving core. We've talked about it a lot. T. Higgins kind of playing out the franchise tag. So should he decide to go at the end of the season, then this whole Cincinnati Bengals project that they're building could fall apart. And when I look at the structure of their offense, it is very Joe Burrow-centric, but not in an appealing MVP-esque kind of manner, because I feel like Joe Burrow relies on his receivers very heavily, and that's always something that's good in a QB, but you can't always do that. You have to sometimes rely on your own abilities. And Joe Burrow, as we've seen throughout his career, has had decimated offensive lines. And maybe that's the reason why the Bengals have this quick passing game employed around him to kind of protect him. That doesn't mean that you can't exploit the nuances of Jamar Chase's game. You can't exploit the nuances of T. Higgins' game. And I feel like the Bengals are in a win-now period where if they fail to win anything or even get to the AFC Championship, then who knows what's going to happen to the structure of this team. It could collapse around them. And so this definitely feels like a make-or-break season for Joe Burrow. And I think being second in MVP odds might be a little bit too much pressure on him, and also might be a highly overvalued kind of pick here. But I get it, because when he's on the field, he's definitely one of the best. But he's not better than the number one guy. No surprise here, Patrick Mahomes. Say what you like about this guy. Say what you like about last season and how he performed. But at the end of the day, he's the best quarterback right now in the NFL. And he might, at the end of the day, be the best quarterback in the history of football. Now, the reason why I think Pat Mahomes is the favorite here at plus 500 is because, well, he doesn't have the most talented wide receiver core he's ever had. He has the most speedy wide receiver core he's ever had. And what the Chiefs love to use is that speed. Also, you have to factor in the factor that they might have drops and they might have moments of inconsistency like last year. But Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy add that new dimension to this Chiefs offense they haven't had since the Tyreek Hill era there. And so adding that factor really opens up the Chiefs offense a lot more. It's not just Patrick Mahomes having to rely on Kelsey to bail him out and relying on secondary receivers like Justin Watson or guys of that nature. It really allows him to focus in on exploiting what he loves best. And when you give Patrick Mahomes one speedy guy, let alone two, then it opens up a whole new possibility for what the Chiefs can be. And Patrick Mahomes will always be at the center of it because he's one of the most talented players we've ever seen. And so with that should end our NFL MVP segment. Coming up next, we stick kind of on the offensive side of the football with our Offensive Player of the Year betting odds. See who are the favorites there. We'll be right back with that after the break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our next segment, sticking on the offensive side of the football with our Offensive Player of the Year betting odds, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is greatly appreciated by all involved, especially me, my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network. So anything you leave is greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let us jump right into our second segment of today's show and stick on the offensive side of the football with our Offensive Player of the Year awards. I like the variation amongst this year's candidates. Still a lot of heavy favorites involved here, but there are guys who kind of are in make or break years, kind of in years where we want to see improvement from them, in offenses that have somewhat failed to include them, and others coming back from injury who just want to establish themselves yet again as some of the better offensive players in the league. And I really like that most of these guys are wide receivers instead of, just running backs, because right now the running back market is very complicated, as we all know. So I appreciate that aspect of it. Without further ado, jump right into it. Starting off with two guys kind of at the bottom of this list, both who've had very different starts to their careers. One more frustrating, the other a little bit more hopeful, but he hasn't really smelled success very often. And those are Bijan Robinson at plus 2,000, Justin Jefferson at plus 1,500. So Bijan Robinson actually gets Justin Jefferson's former quarterback now in his system. Is probably the best quarterback he's ever had, but as a running back, he just wants more touches. That was his problem last year, as Arthur Smith kind of held him back a little bit. Still had a pretty good season, over 900 yards, about 7 or 8 touchdowns. That's always solid. But I felt like he wasn't employed in the way that he can. And as a former Texas player and a player who I've saw very often as a Texas fan, I feel like the best way to exploit Bijan Robinson is get him in space. And I hope Raheem Morris understands that and uses him a lot more, gets him in space, gets him on the outside, allows him to make the moves and cuts that he's known for, and also allow him to break free of this hold that Arthur Smith had over him for quite some time. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, Justin Jefferson has had a lot of success in his NFL career, but this year is very different. At plus 1,500, I think his odds are much lower because Kirk is gone. In steps either Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy. I think it will be Sam Darnold to start off the year, and J.J. McCarthy might be worked in a little bit as the year goes on. Now, Justin Jefferson has always had Kirk Cousins, who always relied upon him as his wide receiver one, and now, who knows? Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy might struggle. The Vikings are definitely looking like they're not in a good spot quarterback-wise in order for the best wide receiver to be happy. Justin Jefferson has always been Kirk Cousins' wide receiver one. It's never in doubt. Obviously, he's had a lot of injuries. Watching receiver kind of, put it into perspective, all the injuries Justin Jefferson had to go through last year, and he really wants this year to be special for him. But it's just a case of getting back to that level of consistency himself, whilst also hoping that his quarterbacks can realize him as that receiver we know he is. And so, both of these guys, not necessarily make or break years, but years where they want to get to where they need to be. Bijan more so than Justin Jefferson, because Justin Jefferson, like I said, has already had so many fantastic seasons. Both of these guys know their potential. And then we move on to guys like Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb, at plus 1,100 and plus 1,000 respectively, who are in very interesting situations in terms of their wide receiver rooms. Jamar Chase, obviously, has always been the number one receiver in Cincinnati. Him and Joe Burrow coming out of LSU together, that connection has always remained. But this year definitely feels weird, mainly due to the rumblings about T. Higgins' contract. Maybe Joe Burrow will want to feed T. Higgins a little bit more. Not to say that Jamar Chase's production will go down, because he's always going to get his production by hook or by crook. But this year feels a little bit weird and tense in that Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver room. And it might be the reason why he's not a little bit higher on this list. I think that he could challenge the top receiver on this list. And then you look at CeeDee Lamb at plus 1,000, who's also kind of in a weird situation where he is also the number one wide receiver in the Dallas Cowboys wide receiver room, but it's kind of by default. I mean, you have an aging Brandon Cooks who might still have a couple good years in him, but is a little bit fishy. And then you have Jake Ferguson, who's more of a red zone kind of tight end, more of a blocking tight end, who occasionally makes himself present in the red zone. And so CeeDee Lamb definitely should have higher or better odds than Jamar Chase, but overall I feel like these two guys are in a weird kind of situation of wide receiver purgatory where their teams aren't necessarily, in the best spot, position-wise. And so I kind of feel like they're anomalous in that they are the number one receivers on their team, but there just feels like a sense of emptiness around them, They definitely are going to have the production that is needed to win a Player of the Year award like this, but I think it's kind of a hindrance to their own development if their other wide receivers are not up to par. And then let's look at the top of the list. Tyreek Hill at plus 750. And of course, CMC tied with him at plus 750. Now Tyreek Hill, as we all know, has two things going for him. One is that it's a very competitive market in terms of Dolphins wide receivers. There's a solid wide receiver too in Jalen Waddle. And two is that his speed and separation really elevates his QB in Tua. If, Tyreek Hill was more of a route runner and could be jammed a little bit more, it would have been harder to kind of put him above other wide receivers. But his speed just allows Tua to just put the ball in the plate for him and he can just explode. And that's why, he has as much yardage as he does. I think he could be close to 2,000 yards receiving this year. I said it. And when all is said and done, he's the wide receiver right now who looks like he's going to have the stats, the touchdowns to back up his case for Offensive Player of the Year. And, when I talk about all these wide receiver rooms for these different guys, and look at the Dolphins, they're kind of predicated on something. They know what they're going to be. They know their identity. And I really don't think the Bengals and Cowboys really do right now. They're in weird places where certain receivers may be unhappy, maybe holding out for money, and they're not in a good situation. So that makes their wide receiver situation more muddled than the Miami Dolphins, who know their guys are going to produce. And that makes Tyreek Hill the top receiver on this list. But I don't necessarily think he's going to be the top dog when all is said and done in terms of this award, because there's a little guy named Christian McCaffrey playing for the San Francisco 49ers who's just that good. And when I think about Christian McCaffrey, I think about a player who just focuses on doing what is necessary for the team. Whatever you need him to do, he's always going to be there. He doesn't even need to score a touchdown for his importance to show through for the San Francisco 49ers. That what makes him so special. And a team that just has so many different weapons. Deebo Samuel, if Brandon Ayuk stays, then him. George Kittle, Brock Purdy, even though a lot of people have criticized him, myself included, for being a system kind of guy, he still can distribute the wealth. And just having a guy in Christian McCaffrey at the running back position, no less, who doesn't necessarily often play like he's a running back, just makes this offense so explosive. Because worrying about Deebo Samuel and George Kittle as receivers is one thing. Worrying about Christian McCaffrey gashing you up the middle is quite another. And when you add the fact that he's a solid blocker, he can receive as well and can throw, as we saw, it just allows the playbook to open up for him wherever the 49ers are on the field. In the red zone, in the open field, even in the opposing team's territory. Christian McCaffrey is always going to be lethal. And looking at this list, Christian McCaffrey has one thing over everyone else on this list. He's on the best team. He's on the best team of anyone on this list. There's a lot of wishful thinking with a lot of these teams. I talk about the Falcons. They're a team of wishful thinking. A lot of expectations are placed on their shoulders, especially on Bijan Robinson's shoulders. So who knows if they'll collapse under the pressure. The Vikings, in a kind of a transitional period. Justin Jefferson may not get as many targets. Who knows? The quarterbacks might struggle in that situation. Jamar Chase, his quarterback is coming back from an injury, and his wide receiver 2 is kind of holding out a little bit. The Cowboys, they're a good offense, but they don't have anyone outside of CeeDee Lamb, so that puts a lot of pressure on him to be above and beyond every other receiver in the league. And then we look at Tyreek Hill. Yeah, he has speed, but he's the one who's elevating to at the end of the day. And should opposing defenses just play two high safeties, let's say, and try and combat his speed, then that renders everything a moot point. And so, at the end of the day, this definitely looks like a very clear path for Christian McCaffrey to win this award, just because of the ability for this 49ers playbook to really open up for him should they be clicking. When they have momentum, Christian McCaffrey is kind of the centerpiece and focal point of what they can do with this offense. And that's why I believe he should be everyone's choice for Offensive Player of the Year. But that should just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we switch to the defensive side of the football. We look at our Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Should be a good segment for you guys. I'll be right back on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. We're going to take a little bit of a hiatus from the offensive side of the ball and switch to the defensive side of the ball. As we all know, we have kind of switched the mindset in terms of fantasy football as well from the offensive side to the defensive side as I've done my IAP player profiles. But let's look at the Defensive Player of the Year betting odds with what should be a very familiar kind of feel to it, as these are players that I've talked about on the show. Without further ado, let's jump right into this segment. I love all of these guys on this list, and it should be a very fun, fascinating segment. Starting off at number 5, a guy I really, really love on the Las Vegas Raiders defense that might go under people's radars in Max Crosby. Now, I know that a lot of pressure is going to be on Max Crosby because he now certainly is the best player on that Raiders defense. But I kind of feel like with that chip on his shoulder, this makes him more powerful. Max Crosby plays in a division where defensive prowess really gets rewarded. And at the end of the day, I think that no matter what, he's always going to be at the top of the list of the best defenders in the league. He had 18 sacks last year, and there's no reason to believe he can't replicate that again. When I think of pure edge rushing talent, there's no player I would rather have on my team than Max Crosby. He's always looking for ways to improve. And when I think about a kind of thin front for the Raiders, I feel like Max Crosby's becoming that leader who can emotionally charge this Raiders defense and make them one of the more underrated units in the league. And it all stems from his ability to rush the passer. So at plus 900, I think he's a kind of a savvy pick, kind of a sneaky little pick there at good value for you guys. But at the end of the day, he still might be held back by that defense, If he can't elevate it, who knows what's going to happen. And a lot of pressure is on his shoulders. But at number 5, he could be someone who could sneak up on you should the Raiders' defense overperform. But coming in at number 4 is a guy who is really a special talent. He's the better Bosa brother, in my humble opinion. And that is... Get my graphic going. Nick Bosa, at plus 800. Now, much like Christian McCaffrey, where he's on the best offense, you can make the case that Nick Bosa is on the best defense. And that's a huge help as well, because it opens up a lot of lanes for him. And the way he's used in the system is so fascinating. On run plays, he can come off the edge, get tackles for loss. He can kind of sit back in that linebacker role, play a bit more coverage. And along with Fred Warner, who's just so intelligent, the understanding and connection between the two best players in this defense is really what makes Nick Bosa stand out in this category. Because Nick Bosa could be kind of an anomalous player in a defense that really kind of relies on his production, much like Max Crosby. That's not the case. Every single player around him believes in their own abilities and also his. And while some guys have left from this 49ers defense, like Javon Kinlaw and others of that nature, and their top 2 safeties kind of fell to injury, I still think that at the end of the day, the fact that the 49ers defense is the best in the league really bolsters Nick Bosa's case, because the way he performs every single year one of the most dominant defenses really makes it really stand out. And he's always going to be in the conversation for at least 8 to 10 tackles for loss, 15 to 20 sacks, because of the way that the 49ers defense can just become so varied because of their talent. And so at plus 800, he's another guy who has a much better case than Max Crosby in terms of the team he plays for. But when I look at the top 3 guys, these are guys who are just so good in defenses that truly have this aura of identity as well. And it's not just about being the best on the best team, it's being the best in terms of your defensive prowess and how you elevate others. And Nick Bosa might be counted out against there. So in the top 3, fascinating top 3. 2 AFC North guys who I think you know, and 1 NFC East guy. So overall, kind of on the Eastern Seaboard for this top 3. But this is perhaps the most solid top 3 you're going to get. And let's start off with number 3, a guy we talked about a lot, the league leader in sacks last year. A guy who's might be held back a little bit due to an addition in that linebacker core for Pittsburgh, TJ Watt. Now, in terms of Patrick Queen coming into this linebacker room, I don't necessarily think it hinders what TJ Watt is capable of. It just, might not elevate his stats as much, because both of them focus on so many different areas. TJ Watt's more of a pass rusher kind of linebacker, and Patrick Queen's kind of like manning the coverage aspect of it. But when all is said and done, it definitely makes you question how TJ Watt might be affected. They definitely have, the Pittsburgh Steelers have a defensive identity based off physicality, and ultimately I think that TJ Watt's pass rushing skills will kind of overcome Patrick Queen's sense of production. But in that defense, you have so much talent at every single level. TJ Watt also kind of seems like Nick Bosa, but in a different sense in that he's playing a position that requires him to do so many things, wear so many different hats, and now that he has a running partner to kind of alleviate that burden, certain stats that really appeal to voters might catch the eye here. And when I compare him and Nick Bosa, what I think TJ Watt has the advantage of is a lot more freedom to play outside of structure. What I mean by that is, while his role as a linebacker is recognized by him, he plays certainly like a linebacker. That now becomes a lot more advantageous now that Patrick Queen is there. A lot of possibilities open up for both of them, actually, because of what Patrick Queen can do. And so, while Nick Bosa definitely has Fred Warner to thank for his ability to gut forward, TJ Watt, now that he has a partner, whereas he didn't necessarily have him before, I think he's going to be more realized for his abilities because of that. And so that's why I think he's ranked a little bit more highly, because of the fact that he's been doing it for so many years without kind of that running mate. And now that he has one, I think his efforts are going to be more appreciated by voters. Coming in number 2 is another guy who's just as versatile at the linebacker position as these two, and kind of can have the same case where you look at him as one of those guys who also has teammates around him that can bolster him as well, but Micah Parsons certainly does feel like someone who's anomalous because of the way he moves around the Cowboys front in so many different ways. You always have to account for him. You always have to recognize that he's not always looking to rush the passer, and he's going to become more calculated. And that's the thing that I was talking about in his player profile, right? The fact that he now has the ability to be one of those guys who's not just worried about, getting to the passer all the time, but can also now focus on developing himself as a true linebacker hybrid. A guy who can get into the backfield but also recognizes times where he can drop back in coverage. And that's what I like about Micah Parsons. His movement. He can kick inside, he can come off the edge, he can do so many different things, he can wear so many different hats. And it's not that TJ Watt and Nick Bosa don't either. It's just that they're not asked to as much. And while the Cowboys' linebacker room certainly isn't very weak, I don't necessarily think outside of Micah Parsons the best aspect of this Cowboys defense. It's the fact that the collective levels of this defense exceed expectations every single time. You have the secondary that's really good in both Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs. You have the main front in DeMarcus Lawrence and Asa Digazua. I really love them and their production. So I think that Micah Parsons really stands out because not only is he playing in a unit that really needs him, but he's doing it in different units that might actually not need him necessarily, that might not need the help. The fact that he's getting as many sacks or even more than DeMarcus Lawrence, who's a certified edge rusher, is fascinating to behold. And it really makes him stand out over TJ Watt and Nick Bosa, who are going to have to kind of share the load. But at the end of the day, he's number 2 for a reason. Because a physical specimen named Myles Garrett exists. You can't necessarily beat this guy, man. He's just so talented at what he does. I remember, and this is a great story about Myles Garrett. I believe, when the Cleveland Browns were on Hard Knocks, it was his second year. It was the year after they went 0-16. And definitely was a very weird feeling in that camp. But the player who fascinated me most was Myles Garrett. Because he wasn't necessarily concerned about, going winless. He was concerned, as a second or third year player, on improving. Every single segment he was in of that show showed a player who desired to grow. And now that he has one of the best defenses in the league behind him, he's finally being recognized as a force. A dominant force that might be immovable at certain times. He's the reason the Browns made the playoffs last year. I can say that about no other player on the Browns, maybe outside of their secondary. Myles Garrett is a catalyst. He's a game changer. When I look at this list, yeah, these guys are game wreckers too, but not to the extent that Myles Garrett essentially is kind of forced to be. He is both the Browns, if you think about it, offense and defense. Without him, the whole infrastructure of the Cleveland Browns kind of makes no sense. There's no rhyme or reason to what the Cleveland Browns are. They're an enigma without him. But because of him, their ceiling is so high because he elevates almost every aspect of what the Cleveland Browns are as a team. Because of his turnovers, the Cleveland Browns had good field position, so they didn't necessarily have to worry about their inexperienced quarterbacks outside of Joe Flacco having to drive as often as possible and get as many points as possible. Because of his sacks, he switched the field position, made field goals longer, and thus he's such a frustrating player to get around. And it all started with him willing to be new and improved every single year of his career. That's just about do it for this segment. Coming up next, we switch to the exciting 2024 rookie class and kind of meeting out who is going to be the offensive rookie of the year and the defensive rookie of the year. Should be some good segments up ahead. We'll be right back after the break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys have enjoyed the show thus far. I'm really enjoying this show. I love looking at all these fantastic players and dissecting them in terms of what awards they can win, because the NFL truly is at an exciting place right now, and I'm just thankful that I get to comment on it. Coming up next, we are commenting on the newest members of the NFL family. That is the 2024 rookie class. A lot of fascinating players on both sides of the ball, and I'm happy that I get to dissect both awards, the offensive rookie and defensive rookie of the year awards. Let's start off on the offensive side of the ball, because that's where all the intrigue lies, whether it's Caleb Williams or Jeenan Daniels at the quarterback position, or Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze at the wide receiver position. You have a fascinating group of players to dissect. Some players are in better situations than others. Some players are looking to help offenses immediately stepping into kind of the top roles in these offenses, and others kind of trying to make their way into the league. Might not necessarily start, but they're going to gain experience and learn from it and ultimately get better for it. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, starting at the bottom of these rankings with a player who I've grown to love as a fan of Texas. You'll never get over that phrase. Xavier Worthy, plus 2,000, just adds that dimension to the Chiefs that I was talking about when we talked about the MVPs and Patrick Mahomes. He's just a speedster, a vertical guy. Drops have been a concern in his career, especially in the red zone, but I think he can work on that. I think as someone who has always relied on his speed, people might be skeptical of him because speedsters haven't really worked out in NFL offenses, but he's different. He can run routes. He has a very nuanced style of using his speed in certain moments, and so who's to say that Xavier Worthy can't be the offensive rookie of the year? He's in a system that really appreciates him and will know how to utilize him, most importantly, and he has the best quarterback in the NFL throwing to him. And so, while there are some concerns, his size maybe, his strength, the drops, I still think he fits very well into that Chiefs schemes, and they'll always find a way to use him to their advantage. And plus 2,000, he could be the dark horse pick you're looking for. And then you have a guy in J.J. McCarthy, plus 800, who, let's be real, probably shouldn't be in the Rookie of the Year discussion, mainly because he might not play as often as other guys on this list. I feel like he's going to have to sit a little bit behind Sam Darnold, wait a little bit, and also, we still don't necessarily know that much about his game. Is he going to be willing to throw the ball deep down the field to Justin Jefferson, or is he going to stick kind of in the short to intermediate routes? What aspects of his run game are the Vikings going to want to utilize? And that just definitely adds a lot of questions to the J.J. McCarthy conundrum of how we are going to assess him. Because, let's be real, while a lot of teams have raved about him, I still haven't seen personally anything that really makes him stand out in one specific regard. And that's kind of concerning to me. I want an NFL quarterback to immediately capture my attention, and J.J. McCarthy just hasn't done that. And so, at plus 1,800, I think he should be a little bit lower on this list, to be honest with you. I think there are guys behind him even that deserve to be higher on this list, and right now I kind of feel a little bit skeptical about J.J. McCarthy. Then you have another guy who I'm kind of skeptical about, and Bo Nix at plus 1,500, who Sean Payton is investing a lot of in terms of drafting him number 12 overall. But along with him, they did draft Troy Franklin, one of his favorite wide receivers in college at Oregon. So that transition might be helpful, but Bo Nix certainly feels like he's stepping into a situation that is fate of circumstance right here. Because Sean Payton can invest in a quarterback all he wants. And he's worked with one of the best in Drew Brees in his career. But at the end of the day, the Broncos are not necessarily a team that I think can rely upon and sustain a young quarterback like Bo Nix. He definitely has certain traits and attributes that make him very appealing. His size, his arm talent, and his ability to kind of rush a little bit. He doesn't necessarily always use it, but it's a trait that's there. I don't necessarily see a path to this award for him. I kind of see him as a guy who might have to be strung along a little bit to get him going. But right now, he's not at a place where he's anywhere near award consideration, let alone for Offensive Rookie of the Year, because of the situation he's in. He's not in a desirable situation like some other guys who are going to be on this list. Then, the other two receivers in this discussion right now, with Malik Neighbors at plus 1,600 and Marvin Harrison Jr., a big jump here to plus 750. I think that these two guys are stepping into situations where they're highly needed and coveted because of these offenses' lack of depth at the position. When you look at Malik Neighbors, he's perhaps, on paper, the best receiver that Daniel Jones has ever had. And that just makes it so much more difficult to assess him. And we know that New York is a media circus, and a lot of players, especially first-round draft picks, especially high first-round draft picks, have kind of suffered in that environment. But Malik Neighbors seems kind of different. In an LSU offense where they kind of needed his route-running presence to break up the verticality, make the LSU offense a little more diverse, I think that Malik Neighbors realizes that Daniel Jones doesn't necessarily need a guy who's always going to be that deep vertical. He just needs a reliable receiver, a good pair of hands. And I think he fits that scheme so well. I think that it allows other wide receivers to become more varied, allows them a little bit more freedom, and ultimately it allows Daniel Jones to be more comfortable in that system. And so Malik Neighbors could be a nice little value pick at plus 800, but then when we look at Marvin Harrison Jr., the number 4 overall pick, he's perhaps in the best situation in terms of who's throwing to him, with Kyler Murray outside of, say, Xavier Worthy. And the reason being that Kyler Murray has always been comfortable with slinging the ball down the field, but due to injuries and thinner wide receiver rooms in the recent past, he kind of needs that new high-profile guy. And Marvin Harrison can be that. And there's a lot of skepticism about, he's just rated this high because of name. His father just played well in the league as a Hall of Famer. No, I truly believe that Marvin Harrison Jr. is talented. And he's immediately going to be the wide receiver one in that Arizona Cardinals offense. His route running is fresh. His hands are fantastic. And last year was kind of a trying year for that Ohio State team in that Kyle McCord, took a little while to settle down. Marvin Harrison Jr. was always that security blanket. Put a ball up to him, you always have a feeling that he could catch it. And that's going to be a fantastic feeling for Kyler Murray. And I feel like this relationship could be like the one we saw early in Kyler Murray's career between him and DeAndre Hopkins, where Kyler Murray was launching balls all over the park, and DeAndre Hopkins was making ridiculous catches. That's the kind of rapport I believe will develop between these two. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is an exciting prospect, but he's not above two QBs who are the number 1 and 2 picks respectively. Let's start off with Jaden Daniels at plus 600. I think Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders is in a situation better than people think. I think that they made a lot of shrewd, astute signings for that offense this year that really balances everything out. I like Austin Eckler if he can get back to full health and get back to what we know he can be. He's going to be one of the elite fantasy running backs if he gets back to full strength. And in real life, I think he adds value in Brian Robinson Jr. And then you have two guys, Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, who are fantastic receivers. I like Logan Thomas as well. Very tough, gritty tight end. This offense, I feel like, is one of the most underestimated in the entire NFL. Yes, they play in the competitive NFC East, but looking past that factor, this offense certainly has some appealing components to it. And Jaden Daniels certainly has the talent and savvy to really get going. I like his dual threat ability. Maybe as a tamp down on using the strength of his arm to beat defenses because he doesn't necessarily have to. And it really can open up to a point where Jaden Daniels can really challenge at the end of the day. Everyone knows who the number 1 rookie is. It's Caleb Williams, plus 125. A huge march between him and Daniels. But when we look at Caleb Williams, and we look at the situation he's walking into, it's just one of the best for any player in football, let alone a rookie, let alone one of the most talented rookies we've seen. And Caleb Williams walking into that receiver room should kind of feel comfortable with every single one of those receivers. Keenan Allen gives him the experience. DJ Moore gives him the experience of being a Bear the longest in that offense. And Roma Dunze is a rookie as well, who he's already had a connection with, kind of training for the combine beforehand. And so, at every single wide receiver position, no matter who emerges as wide receiver 1, there's a lot to like about each and every one of these players at his disposal. Add in Cole Kmet, who is a tight end on the rise, who I really like. And this offense could be clicking from the get-go. He's also in kind of a pressure situation where he has to deliver. But when all is said and done, I think that Caleb Williams can be the franchise quarterback the Bears want and need. That should just about do it for this segment of today's show. Coming up for our last segment of the day, we switch to the defensive side of the ball for these rookies, in what should be a nice little closing segment to today's NFL Awards and Betting Odds show. Be right back. Hello everyone and welcome to today's last segment here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. This has been quite the enjoyable show for me. Hope it is just as enjoyable for you guys watching. But to close out today's show, we return back to the defensive side of the ball and look at the defensive rookies coming into this league. Now I don't know why, but it definitely feels like a lot of these defensive rookies might have a chip on their shoulders because a lot of them did not go as soon as pundits and people thought. And it's definitely a weird factor to consider because I feel like this is one of the deepest defensive classes we've seen, but maybe not the most quote-unquote talented that we've seen. But that being said, it creates a very even defensive rookie of the year race that could come down to who just fits the defensive scheme of their team the best. And that's what I really like about dissecting this. I like that I saved this for last because this is one where we can get into the nitty-gritty of each of these players and how they fit these defensive schemes. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting off with a guy who we drafted right here. And I think that this guy's going to fit right into our defense so superbly. Byron Murphy II at plus 12,000. Kind of long odds, but I think that in terms of what he brings to Seattle, he's going to eat blockers, allow for players to get their own production, but he's going to be a TFL monster, dude. I really think that Byron Murphy II is underestimated here. But the defensive tackle position, it's going to be hard to get stats that will appeal to voters. And I understand that. I think at Texas, he was much more appreciated because it was him and Sweat, and they were just truly dominant in every single aspect of the game. The NFL is going to be different. And on the Seattle front, it's slowly improving. I think that he's going to be definitely one of the best players this year for this front, but at the defensive tackle position, it's going to be hard to stand out. It's going to be hard to accrue stats that really pop out to voters and garner him enough votes to ultimately become the defensive rookie of the year. But that being said, there's some magic in terms of Seattle defensive rookies. That's definitely a different story because they're secondary players, but, you know, it is what it is. We'll have to see. Coming in at number 6, I believe, on this list, or 5 right here, Terrion Arnold at plus 1,100 steps into a situation where he's in this really young, hungry Lions secondary, who was recently seen as one of the weakest points of this Lions team that's in a stage of win now. And I really think he's going to pop. He's paired up with former teammate Brian Branch. I really like Malafanu and Joseph in this secondary, and Terrion Arnold just steps into a situation where his physicality and range is desperately needed. And I really like the coach fit as well because Dan Campbell's going to bring out the fierceness in him, the grit in him, and the fight in him to really go along with the defensive identity the Lions have established under Dan Campbell. And so, what I really think makes Terrion Arnold a wild card here is how this new look Lions secondary performs over a long period of time. Because Terrion Arnold stepping into the situation, his rookie season definitely seems like it's one that could factor in for the long run and be really successful. So, if he performs well his rookie year and sets a good foundation and continues to improve throughout his career, that's much better than winning Defensive Rookie of the Year, in my humble opinion. He's a fantastic candidate, highly underrated secondary player, and he certainly feels like someone who we're going to have to keep an eye on as years go on, as he develops, but he's in a very attractive situation, and I think that Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn will coach him up good. But he's behind Quinion Mitchell in secondary. Actually, they're tied, but I think that Quinion Mitchell has a better chance, to be honest with you. At plus 1,100, Quinion Mitchell just goes into a secondary where he's going to be a star. He's not going to start maybe as much as Terrion Arnold, but he's certainly in a situation that really is a highly appealing one for any young corner with the Philadelphia Eagles. A, He gets to learn under one of the best cornerbacks of the 21st century in Darius Slay. B, he's coming into a situation where you have that melded experience and youth. And C, he's one of the speediest corners in that secondary. And that's going to be highly coveted. Because if Darius Slay just turns into a coverage man who's not relying upon speed, you might want a speedier guy in your secondary to really cover true guys. That's really going to help. I think his speed stands out a little bit more over Terrion Arnold. Terrion Arnold might be the more rangy and versatile corner, and the more aggressive one at that. But Quinion Mitchell's speed is really going to be a factor, especially in a Philadelphia Eagles secondary that's looking for balance, looking for the right solutions as they kind of retool that secondary if and when Darius Slay leaves them. And so Quinion Mitchell is going to be someone, much like Terrion Arnold is going to keep an eye on, but I think that in terms of the rookie season, he's going to immediately be coveted by a lot of people for his ability to use his speed to his advantage. So that's why he's the highest rated secondary player in terms of betting odds for Defensive Rookie of the Year. But moving up to the big guys, Jared Verse at plus 1,000. I think Jared Verse is scary on the Los Angeles Rams. I'm kind of mad that he went to Los Angeles, but I'm still happy that we got Byron Murphy. Jared Verse, man, I think he's going to slot right into that Los Angeles Rams front. He has big shoes to fill in terms of being what Aaron Donald was, but I don't necessarily think he has to be that. If he's just a serviceable edge rusher, he's going to fit right along this line. You have young guys in Kobe Turner and Byron Young who you want to build around. And to me, that just makes Jared Verse pop out a lot more. Because if he translates into this line, well, there's a young, hungry line, then people will be forgetting Aaron Donald in this Rams system and be screaming Jared Verse's praises if and should he fit seamlessly into this defense. And I think he will. And I think he's going to have a fantastic stat line when all is said and done. Maybe not at the level of some high-end defensive players we talked about earlier in this show because he's not at the point in his career. But he certainly is going to be one to watch as the year goes on. He's stepping into a young defense that's really, really looking forward to playing with him. And for a Rams defense that is always looking, is always searching for the next big thing, Jared Verse could be that guy. Let's look at our top two. Laiatu Latu, the first defensive player off the board at number 15. And a lot of people were saying that if his medical history was much better, he could have been at least in the top 10, maybe even the top 5. That's just how good he is. And he steps into an indie situation that's really interesting. Because when I look at them, they're a defense that's up and coming. I like some of their players. I like EJ Speed. I like Zaire Franklin. I'm starting to like their secondary, get to know them a little bit better. But ultimately, what I love about Laiatu Latu is that he can immediately come in and be versatile. Health is going to be an issue down the line eventually. But if they find ways to A, get the best out of him in different situations, and B, preserve him, then Laiatu Latu is going to be much like Terrion Arnold and Quinion Mitchell in that perhaps his rookie season might not be as good as people think. At plus 650, that's asking a lot of him in terms of odds to be a high-end candidate. But at the end of the day, the number one defensive player off the board, the Colts saw something in him outside of his injury history that really made him stand out. And when he's on the field, he's a really special player. Because he can play a linebacker, he can drop into coverage, and he can also rush the passer. That's going to be highly valued for this Indianapolis Colts defense that's really looking to be one of the best and most underrated units in the league. But he's not beating out Dallas Turner plus 500. My father, who's a Minnesota Vikings fan, will be very happy about this. I think that Dallas Turner, though, might be a little bit overrated, in my humble opinion. I like him as a player. I think he's lengthy. I think he really can improve on his pass rush consistency. And he's in a situation where he's going to be expected to carry a heavy workload. They lose Danielle Hunter, so he's immediately going to step into a role that's big. And next to Jonathan Greer, we're going to have to see how that Minnesota front is. But when all is said and done, I don't necessarily think that he's stepping into the best defensive situation of these people, because when I think of defensive rookies of the year, I think of these guys who improve as the season moves on. Like, for example, like, I know I'm harping on the Seahawks, but Devin Witherspoon, he improved steadily as the season went on. Will Dallas Turner really improve as the season goes on if so much pressure is put upon him to be the number one Vikings edge rusher now? I don't necessarily think so. And at the end of the day, all the guys below him on this list have one thing in common. They have the ability in these setups to grow into their teams. Dallas Turner is going to immediately be thrown onto the field. And at the end of the day, that might be too much pressure for him to overcome. I still like him as a player. I still think he can win the award. But when all is said and done, if it's Dallas Turner versus the field, I'm taking the field. That should just about do it for the segment. And that is ultimately the end of the show as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for all your support. Consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud to support us even further. The network really appreciates it as well. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show. But that is all for today on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We'll be back better than ever tomorrow. Thank you guys yet again.